And so Formula One's record-breaking 23-race World Championship season, the 21 season, assuming all the races happen, that is almost upon us. And it's preceded by the Bahrain test, which begins at the end of this week on the Friday, Saturday and Sunday. That's right, 3 days. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. 3 days before a 23-race World Championship. Now, why only one test and why so short? Well, the answer is, of course, cost saving. The interesting thing is that the teams and the FIA and everybody else agreed to this 1 3-day test before the start of the season, before Pirelli decided to radically change the construction of their tyres. And that's thrown a massive amount of additional development work, if that's the right word, into the laps of the teams as they go into this 3-day test. Put aside all the other issues, and well, there are 4 main issues, I think, and let's have a look at them off the bat. Well, the first is McLaren Mercedes. If you're going to change power units from Renault to Mercedes, this has got to be about the worst possible point in the history of Formula One in which to do so. New installation, new rear suspension, new everything around the back of the car and probably the front as well. And they've got 3 days to get it all ready for the Bahrain Grand Prix. Very little time, and I think looking back now, most people logically would agree that 3 days is not enough, bearing in mind that there is a team that does have a radically different car for 2021. Everybody else is basically saying, and this is one of the reasons that they went for this 3-day test, that the cars are basically evolution of the 2020 cars. The big changes are coming for 2022. And that's fair enough, and that does actually apply to all the other teams. Although Ferrari are doing a lot of work on their engine, and the word on the pit lane street is that the Ferrari engine will be a big improvement. Let's hope it is for 2021. And that won't just happen overnight either. They'll need as much testing as they can possibly get. Anyway, it is a 3-day test, and McLaren have to develop their new car around a brand new power unit. They've got their own gearbox. They're not running the Mercedes gearbox. Lots of new things on that car. And so you got to say,
really the plan is, and the target is to get to Bahrain Sunday afternoon, be on the grid, and for there to be no inch of panic. It's really just about feeling comfortable and familiar with all the crew.
And that is a result of, and that's a factor of, this 3-day test. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, those Pirelli tyres. Because of the stresses and loads that we saw in some races last year, particularly Silverstone, of course, Pirelli have decided to add about 600 grams to the front and the rear tyres this year in terms of a stronger, beefier construction. And that is a big change for everything. That's a big change for the dynamic loads, that's a big change for wear rates, it's a big change for the way the degradation may come in. And it's 600 grams front and rear, which would suggest and imply that there is a bigger change at the front, because obviously the fronts are slightly smaller. If they're adding even more weight to the front, there will be different feel to the geometry, everything else, steering probably as well. So that's a big thing. And normally the teams would be thinking, wow, big change in the tyre construction. We will put 2 or 3 solid days together of evaluating the impact of that on our setup and how we're going to get around, if the degradation is going to be a lot worse, a lot different, even better perhaps. But of course they don't have that luxury now because it's a 3-day test, and there are so many other factors that have to be built in to making this Bahrain test as efficient as possible for all the teams. So let's look at a third factor now, and that is day into night. The Bahrain Grand Prix will be held as ever at dusk, and qualifying will be in the cooler late afternoon of Saturday. But guess what? The 3 days of the test are full days in Bahrain. So the first half of all 3 days is in very hot sunshine, which bears no relation to the way the Grand Prix is going to be. And obviously the second half of the day is going to be a lot more relevant. So the teams then will be thinking, okay, in the morning we're not going to be able to do much with tyres, so we're going to work on installation, cooling systems, reliability runs probably, and then we'll get the tyres under the microscope in the afternoon. But then that, of course, opens another can of worms, and that is for the rookie drivers, because if you look at it, 3 days, hot at the top, cold at the bottom, you can't put a driver in on the first day and then let him run half the second day, because one of them is going to have more cold days or hot days than the other. So what you're going to see in Bahrain, I think, is that each driver is going to do half a day, get out of the car, and then the other driver is going to again try to get some sort of feedback that'll work across both drivers. And that won't be easy either, particularly for the rookies. And you take a driver like Yuki Tsunoda, who's done very little Formula One mileage. He was out in Imola, did a couple of days in Imola, in an old car, of course. He did the young driver test day at Abu Dhabi on December 15, 2020, admittedly in a current car, but according to the regulations, wasn't able to adjust the car in any way. It was just a tyre test, a short tyre test, and it was only 1 day anyway. And here he is going to his first full season of Formula One, 23 race world championship, and he's going in with 1.5 days, of which at least a half of that is going to be in sunshine, not really relevant to the Bahrain Grand Prix. And that's not a lot of mileage, so that's a big problem as well. And it's not only Tsunoda, but I mention him because of his lack of mileage. Obviously, Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin, both rookies as well, but they've done more test mileage in Formula One cars, again, not current cars, over the last couple of years. So that's not quite the same for them. But of course, it also applies to all these drivers getting used to a new car for the first time. 1.5 days, basically. And if you take out, as I say, if you take out one of the mornings, because it's not really relevant to what's going on, 1 day of testing going into the Grand Prix. So it all boils down to testing in Bahrain almost being like a Grand Prix in the way it's going to be structured, I think, for all the teams. Not a minute to lose on anything. And beyond that, they're going to be having to try to work out what they're doing with tyres. So a lot of question marks. Tyres, rookies, what they're going to do in the heat of the day, the McLaren Mercedes package, trying to get as much mileage on it as possible. And of course, everybody running new aero elements on the cars as well. We've seen, and Craig Scarborough's done a brilliant job detailing how the teams have adapted to those, and indeed how they've used up their tokens, which now limit the amount of development you can do on a car at any given off-season. In terms of logistics, one car will be going to Bahrain and that car will remain out there, but most of the personnel after this 3-day test will all come back to the UK or back to Europe again and then go back for the Grand Prix. That's, of course, a lot of COVID protocol that will have to take place. But beyond that, wouldn't you just ask the question, why don't we just run for a couple of days next week as well, just to make it a little bit easier for everybody? But cost is everything. Cost is what they're focusing on in Formula One now. Aside from driver salaries, marketing, motorhomes, well, all the other things we've talked about over the last couple of months in the winter. Anyway, really looking forward, of course, to the 21 season. I'm sure all Formula One fans are. So let's just finish with Lewis Hamilton talking about the new Mercedes W12.
Fascinating to see technology evolve. As I said, it is the same foundations of last year's car, but they've obviously got new components around it. But there's only two of us that get to drive this car, all year long. This is going to be our home. This is going to be with us, connected to us on this crazy journey that we have no idea what's up ahead of us. And yes, so it's the most exciting. It's like going to the fun fair knowing you're going to ride a roller coaster, but we get to do that all year long. So.